Amber, you want to have opening prayer for us?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you so much for another Sabbath day, another end of the week. I want to ask for your blessing on our conversation and open our minds, be with us today. We want to thank you for your presence and for your love. Amen.
Amen. All right. So again, we've got another very short, like a one-sentence parable. And we are in Matthew 13 on this one. And let's just, even though it's short, let's do it from a couple of different versions. So New King James says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and hid for joy over it, and goes and sells all that he has and he buys that field. It's kind of interesting because there's not any much explanation about it at all, but that's the parable. So who's got some of our other fun versions? Read that to us, see if there's anything different about that. Who's got NLT? It's Shady on. She usually has NLT.
Yeah, I can read it. Just 44.
44, yeah.
The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered hidden in a field. In his excitement, he hid it again and sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field.
That's it.
That's it.
What about who's got the remedy?
I have it.
You read it from there.
Yeah, I have it.
See what Tim did with it.
The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure a man discovered in a field. In his excitement, he sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field and get the treasure too.
Okay. So Amber had an interesting question about this parable the other night. And it had to do with, if I remember it correctly, wouldn't it have been more fair for the guy to tell the guy that owned the field first about the treasure in case he wanted it? Thought that was a good question. So what about this parable? What do you guys want to do with this parable? Anybody come up with a modern version of the parable? Hopefully someone's got one before we're done today. So just reminding you now in case you got to think about it some more. But what catches you about this parable? What do you want to do with this?
What did we think about?
What's that?
I was asking Dad what we thought of one last night, but I forgot it already.
What's
Oh, a
that?
modern parable?
Our parable.
Jog my memory.
First, maybe let's do what's the main point of the parable?
Kingdom of heaven.
Well, yeah, it says kingdom of heaven. So what's expand on that though? What's the main point?
That it is the greatest treasure.
Okay. So it's speaking first about the value of whatever it is.
I like what Ellen White talks about, that the field represents the scriptures and the treasure represents the gospel.
Yeah. That's probably all he was trying to cover, probably, in the parable.
Yeah, and it's an interesting distinction, Frank, because we put such heavy trust in the scripture, Or maybe more specifically, I could say, we put value in the pursuit of being able to quote, repeat, or explain complicated verses in the scripture, like to pile up knowledge, right? And yet that verse that says you search the scriptures because you think in there you have life, but you don't want the treasure. That's an interesting angle, because it's possible to have a field and have no understanding or value, understood value in the treasure that's in that field, which is kind of amazing. That's not really the point of this parable, but it's a side point. So yeah, you have the scripture, which is the field, and the field was what the man was, his attention was on first, because he was just there to lease the field or rent the field to be able to plant crops for his family. And that was the main intent. But suddenly he goes looking like a crazy man. His friends all thought he was crazy looking, because what's he doing? Selling everything he's got to buy that field that's just going to give him a wheat crop. They didn't see much value or much sense in what he was thinking, what he was doing. What else you want to do with this parable?
I liked what Sister White said at the very end of her little first section on this. She said just very plainly, the field is the Holy Scriptures. But then she said the treasure is the gospel.
That's what I just said.
Yep. Did I not hear you? I'm sorry, Frank.
No, that's okay. That's the point we're working on, which is the distinction between the field and the treasure. So how about this? Who can answer this question? If you think about everything you have currently, house or houses or lands or whatever it is you have, your total asset value. And then if you were out in an empty field and you found a treasure like this, what dollar figure of value would it have to be in that hole in the ground? What level of value would it have to be in order for you to be willing to sell everything you've got to obtain that field?
It would have to be clearly way over the price of what I currently have and the value of my time of selling it and the possibility of whatever could go wrong. Like, it has to be a good price over what I think my own property and everything is worth.
So maybe like double that, whatever that number is, or triple, quadruple, what? Because not only do you have a dollar figure in your assets, but you have the blood and sweat it took to do to it what you've done to it. I've been to your house a lot, Amber, and I've seen it and watched it go from, where you guys first started with it to all the things you guys have done and worked on it. So in my mind, I can easily imagine there's a lot that goes into it. So when you think about how important and valuable that is to you, what kind of a dollar figure would whatever's in this field need to be in order to make it worth giving all that up just to get this empty field?
It would have to be so much that it was just a no-brainer.
Good point, Chris. Good point. I like that, because if you look at it, we're just stuck on this little floating planet, right? And then, even science is dumbfounded by how much universe is out there and God's creation out there. And God's inviting us to that. So that, if you compare that to our little sin-ridden piece of earth here, is just overwhelming. It's that overwhelming treasure.
Yeah, so obviously the value of the gospel is highly valuable, especially to those of us that love it. But I'm just thinking in monetary terms of the parable, a field with an actual box with some sort of treasure in it. Chris, I've been to your place a lot too, even helped work on your place a little bit. So there's some value there, the blood, sweat, and tears there. What kind of dollar figure would it have to be in a field to make it worth getting rid of everything you currently have in order to have that field? No brainer, you said, but can you put a dollar figure on it? What would be a no brainer? 10 million?
Well, I guess to me it would just be that I was so sure that what it was so much better that maybe, I guess, I don't know about a dollar figure in my mind. It just me being absolutely positive that there's no possible way what I'm trading is, worth more, like obviously I would have to just be sure that what I was getting was just absolutely amazing.
And that's what's seen in this, because the guy is looking crazy to his family.
That's right.
I
Not
kind of
only
like it.
crazy,
Oh, go ahead.
not only crazy, but is he trying to hide it from everybody else so nobody else could get it?
Yeah, that was the question Amber asked the other night is what's going on in this parable where he's hiding it so nobody else can have it, which isn't really the point of the parable. But I'm just trying to think in terms, I still want to see if anybody can put a dollar figure on your life at the moment. I was trying to think, all the stuff. To me, the number would have to not just include the cost of whatever it is I hold. So let's say that's 100,000, and then the field itself is going to cost, let's say another 40,000 just because it's an empty field. So it's got to be at least enough to replace all of that. So maybe 500,000 might get me excited enough to get rid of everything I currently own to buy that field. I was just wondering if anybody else got a number they could throw on. What would make it a no-brainer for you? 500,000?
I know what for John. John would say that if I can't use it in Bangladesh, it's not worth anything.
Can't use what?
Can't use it in Bangladesh, then it's not worth.
Oh,
Yeah,
At
that's
all.
right. Yeah. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I know that there's something else that has a greater value. And
well, I
if
know
this-
you guys are doing really well at staying on the real values of the gospel. I was just trying to say money-wise, money to money. What would we say would make sense if you found out this guy, he's got a house or whatever he's got, and then he's gonna say he's looking crazy. But then if he told you, yeah, but look what I found in that field, and it was what dollar amount would make you go, oh yeah, I see why you did that. Not talking about the gospel yet. I'm just trying to think in dollars. That's okay. Nobody wants to come
All
on
right,
here.
you really want a number?
Yeah.
$1 cajillion.
$1 cajillion?
It needs
would-
to be as much as that asteroid that NASA found.
There you
That's
go.
worth like I think they had to literally make up a word for the new dollar.
Wait,
amount.
John, so that I understand, you're saying that you're so in love with your current house, with where you're living and all the stuff you've got, that
Oh,
you wouldn't get rid of all that unless the field was worth $1 cajillion?
no, see, now you're switching it on me. I thought
messing
we were talking about the value of.
No, I keep trying to explain. I'm not talking about the value of the gospel. I'm talking about the value of the field, the treasure in the field. How much money would it take for you to be interested in getting rid of everything you currently have in order to have the new field? How much money in the field?
Oh,
So
I'm gonna
what
say
you're
$1 million.
saying,
What?
I'm gonna say $1 million.
Be
for
careful. I
Amber,
think he might be working for the I don't know, the asset people who are trying to figure out how much you're worth.
I think what you're trying to get at, Bobby, is that even the little amount that we think that we can get from that, God is so much more.
Well, we'll get to that point. Yes, Frank. But first, I wanted you to tell me, how valuable do you think your life is currently without the gospel? In other words,
I was gonna start
why
with Amber, where Amber went. $1 million would
okay,
be
we're
planned this week, but I'm not sure what it'll be next year the same time. That's how flexible that is.
Well, see, my plan is this: I can sell everything now for whatever dollar amount, repurchase it after I get the $1 million, and still have money left over. So I'm still good.
Right. That's what I was asking. So what amount of money would it take for you to get there? Is it $1 million? Amber said $1 million. So John said a cajillion. His house must be way too valuable.
No.
He's probably thinking of the garden and that he grew.
You mean my crops?
The special crop.
Yeah.
Well, can it be extended to more than just like, can I include my parents' property in it? Like I need to.
Well, I think just to stick with the simplicity of the parable, where I'm trying to just get us to think about for a minute, and I'm not talking about spiritual, I'm just talking about earthly, is what value do we put on what we currently have? How valuable is it? And what value would it take for us to be interested in letting go of it? Last week we talked about, I'll try to move on a little bit here. Last week we talked about those crazy people in 1844. They did exactly that, but they did it in the spiritual terms you're thinking of giving it all up for what they believed at the time to be the gospel or the truth that they needed to understand. And yeah, they were thought of as crazy. They were looked at as crazy. And even today, growing up, supposedly descendants of those people in class, in academy, the way I learned that story was they shouldn't have got quite that excited. I mean, the guy shouldn't have sold everything he had to get the new field, because it didn't turn out exactly the way we think it should have turned out, right? And so we put this sort of value on really how much is this thing worth? What's the value of this? And what is it we're willing to give up now in order to have it? Jesus is trying to say in this parable, and I think Chris probably nailed it with it, it's got to be a no-brainer, which says, to me, there's something important about, you can't ask people to just give up stuff. But as they learn the value of the gospel, as they taste of its value, it will be natural for them to, when they get excited about its value, to see its value go up and up and up and up until, that's what I think John was meaning by a cajillion, right? It's worth a cajillion.
Well, you just kept trying to get a number out of us, so I finally gave you one.
You finally gave me one. That's all right. So I think that it is worth thinking about this parable of, yeah, exactly. What would it take to get me that excited enough to no longer have value in what I have, but in what I found? And it certainly isn't the field. There's not a whole lot to be excited about the field. The field, yes, it can grow some crops if we know how to grow those crops, but that's certainly not what the guy got excited about. It's much cheaper for a farmer to lease the field because he's not stuck in payments or long-term ownership and taxes and all that other kind of stuff, right? If you just lease it for this year, plant it, and it works, then you know it's a good field and it's worth leasing again next year. It's a very low-risk deal. This guy was starting with a low-risk deal, and then he went all in. And that all in thing, when it comes to bridging it across to the spiritual realm, that is worth thinking about. And that's where I wanted to go next, was what are your guys' thoughts about that? What is it really to have spiritually, have that treasure? What's your thoughts or Yuval on that?
I got one.
Sure, go ahead.
So now you got the treasure, right? What did Jesus say to the rich young ruler?
Let's sell everything you have.
So basically, this treasure has nothing to do with me at all.
Has to
So
do with
something,
what?
Something like that, because we did it, and yeah, you it's
Go ahead.
well, I think he was in the middle, or you guys were in the middle of a thought, so I don't want to interrupt that.
No, Frank was just saying it has nothing to do with me at all. We're gonna finish that, Frank?
No, I mean, a little bit has to deal with me, but basically, it's all about Christ. So,
Christ is the treasure.
yeah, he's the treasure, the gospel, basically God's character. So, yeah, in a way, it's not about me, because me is selfishness, where this whole new way of thinking is selflessness, other-centeredness. So, yeah, it's not about me. That's why this treasure is so powerful.
Yeah, if you're, the whole point is like, if you're dying to self, you're giving everything up. I mean, to everyone else, it might look like you're buying a silly, rotten field that's worthless, but you have experienced and tasted and seen that there's something amazing out there, and you're willing to give everything up. And it might look to everyone like, yeah, you're nuts.
So if we're looking at this from a perspective of value, then at least in part, Christ is offering you to become completely debt-free if you are burdened by debt. Again, I'm using that more as an analogy and not literally talking about financial debt. But apparently this guy, well, apparently this guy not only found a field that had value in it, but he felt so strongly about it that it was going to provide everything that he needed beyond the value of what he already owned. So, and again, I'm kind of connecting it to the come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. So here he is. He comes into this field for the purpose of toiling to make a living, toiling to survive in the world. And he happens upon this treasure that's going to give him freedom from that. But apparently he has to make a purchase. Right? He has to give something up to be able to get that field so that he can have the treasure.
Well, I like what you're connecting there, John, because I want to ask, maybe pick on Frank first. Frank, the gospel, which is, you guys have identified clearly, that's the treasure. Does the gospel actually have what John just described? In it, the gospel, does it have everything to provide for your every need so that you no longer have to toil for your earthly wants and needs?
Well, unfortunately, self gets in the way, but the answer is yes, the gospel does. But unfortunately, like I said, self gets in the way. And I think that's what this little parable is about, is selling self, getting rid of self. He went and got all his stuff and sold it. In other words, he got rid of self.
So do you think that the treasure, which is the gospel, actually has in it everything needed so you no longer have to go to work anymore, Frank, and make any money?
That's powerful.
Just a question.
No work, no eat.
Yeah.
But if
Well,
God's not calling you to do that, is it presumption to do that?
Well, you could ask it in the reverse way. If
Yes.
God's not calling you to go to work today, was it presumption to go to work and make money?
But see, my work involves helping others, so I'm kind of at a loss on that question.
Well, what
I'm still,
trying to do is-
I'm still thinking about what Jesus said he's giving freedom from, right? And yes, it's true. There is some freedom in not worrying about our financial needs and so on, right? God has said he will provide. Uh, but that doesn't mean he's offering us freedom from labor. In fact, he gave us labor for our own good. But I'm focusing on the debt being the sin and the burden of false religion and everything that getting to know God and coming to know him can free us from. That's the value, that's the treasure. So
It's true. The treasure will, its first focus is to free us from sin. I think, though, part of the story has always been about, let's take the disciples as an example, of shifting their labor from fishing for fish to fishing for men. And I'm just looking on the screen here, and I see 8, 12, 13 people. 13 people is not very many. I guess 2 with mom and dad, so that's 14. That's not very many when you consider what's really going on around us. What's going on around us is people everywhere hurting and broken and dying under the wrong gospel, under the lie, under the deception, under the power of depression, of wrong ideas about life, about God, about religion, suicide and attempted suicides. And if there was only 14 people, is that anywhere near enough to start taking care of and feeding with just the gospel everybody in the state of Washington that needs it?
Well, I think Christ started out with 12.
Okay, so we got a couple extras.
Then the Pentecost happened. That doubled. That made it up to 3,000, and then 5,000 later. Right.
Which is showing the pattern of what it looks like when 12 or 11 really did put down the pursuit of everything else in life. Now, what happens if they don't put it down and they just say, well, it might be presumption to stop going fish for fish? What happens if they don't put it down and they don't risk it all and they don't run with this, what seems to everyone else to be this crazy man out on the hillside talking to people and healing and blessing? I mean, is it ever really, I guess we could ask it this way. The only reason I bring up the question is it ever going to go there? And if it is, how will it be any easier that day to switch our thinking from all the things we do pursue in life to just the treasure in the field? That's really what the parable is about. The parable is about, do we see the real value of what's under the dirt in the scriptures? Or is it still, it's interesting and we like it and it's fun, but it's not valuable enough to give up everything else yet, because we still worried about eating and sleeping and getting our clothes.
Well, if I didn't go to work, maybe I wouldn't have had the opportunity to share that treasure with Shady too, like there's opportunity to reach people where you're working.
There's opportunity everywhere. My question is about, if God's plan is to take it from where you're able to share it with 1 in 2 years to sharing it with 10 a day, do you want to stay on the current plan, or you want to shift to the actual full-blown treasure? Because it's true. Every street, every corner, every store, every place there's even one person is a great place to share with a Shady or a Bobby or a John. So that will always be true. I'm talking about the amount of time that our life consumes in anything other than doing the gospel when there's so much hurting going on out there. And again, I'm only asking our brains to think about. I asked the principal one time, principal of my academy after I had graduated. I asked him, and I was thinking of this morning because my mom and dad and I were talking about the Sabbath school lesson studies on education. So this last week, of course, some of you heard me Thursday night too. I've been thinking through just, back in the day with academy and education. And our academy, when you come in the front doors to what we call the commons area there, right on the big wall in front of you as you come in, it was the wall of the chapel, but it's the wall that you face as you come in the front doors. And it had in big letters up there, the statement, to restore in man the image of his maker is the object of education. We read that every single morning for 4 years going to academy there. And at the end of that 4 years, I asked my principal, I said, do you believe that someday there's going to be a latter rain? And in that latter rain, we're going to leave behind the pursuit of most of what we're doing in this building. And we're going to go out and do what Peter, James, and John did more full time. And he said, yes, I do believe that. And I said, okay, so what do you think has to change for us to get from where we are now to there? And he cried. He said he couldn't say. He said, I don't even know how to answer that question. And tears were coming down his face because here he was, the principal of the educational system at Andrews Academy, and yet he was. I didn't realize my question was going to evoke this in him, but he was having to face the fact that his entire career, and he still had not figured out how to move us as young people from the pursuit of the world to what Peter, James, and John found in the field. And what they gave up everything, not just to have for themselves. You're right, Frank, when you're bringing up the thing about the unselfishness or the selfishness need to go away. But they did more than just get the treasure for themselves. The fun part about Amber's question about did he hide the treasure was actually what happened is once he got that treasure, it so changed him. This is the rest of the story. So changed him that he was passing it out everywhere, even though the people were beating him and spitting on him and whipping him for doing what he was doing and giving away what he was giving away with. And pretty soon they're put in prison and put in pots of boiling oil and all that. And meanwhile, what they did different in their pursuit in life, what they found as such a great value, so impacted them and so impacted the people around them that 3,000 came in a day, 2,000 maybe the next week or whatever the numbers were. Those people were super grateful and excited about the guy who found the treasure and started to share it all around him. They were the hurting, the broken, the depressed and wanting to commit suicide. They were the ones that were in desperate need of the gospel, that before the man was too busy harvesting his crops, planting and harvesting his crops, to really be able to affect and touch their lives in the way that those people really needed it. So there is something real about switching from fishing for fish to fishing for men. And I'm not saying that I can tell you how to do that today. I just know this parable is asking us to consider how much do we value what we have and what we're pursuing, and is it valuable enough to say, yeah, I don't have time for that empty field with the treasure in the field. Anyway, that's my sermon for today. Sorry, what's some thoughts you got about that?
So I read this to Micah this morning and we had a discussion about it. And one thing one of his questions was, what exactly is worldly treasure? We delved into Christ object lessons, obviously not just the parable, but
Good.
but I said, yeah, that's actually, I asked him that. He said, I was just going to ask that. And we talked about what pretty much anything that comes in the way of wanting to know Christ or wanting to know the truth. So basically, this guy who had to sell absolutely everything to obtain this treasure in a field, if he valued anything over anything that he had enough to not sell it, he could not obtain the treasure in this field.
That's
And
a
that's
tough formula.
yeah, that speaks greatly, because you anything that's in the way of between you, that comes between you, that you value high enough to go, I don't know that I can give that up. That's your greatest weakness, and that's the one thing that will hold you back, because you're not willing. And I think that that's where we need to be, not feeling like, oh, today should I go to work? Am I being called to go to work or not? I think it's the whole idea of, when God calls me to sell everything and give everything up, I need to be okay with doing that. I need to not have anything in my head that's so powerful that it's going to hold me back from going out and selling everything, because the gospel is worth it.
So here's how that, I like that, Amber, because here's how that looks in a practical way. Obviously, 1844 does show us one thing, and that is getting rid of everything to stand out on the street corner and not know what to do next is not really of value. So that certainly isn't the point. But if you're going to work and you meet, as Barb was indicating, a shady, and you are willing to sacrifice the time that you're not getting paid for to help that person, to speak to that person, to reach into their lives and touch them, that's what you're choosing in those moments, that's more valuable than your money making or your career or your food or your clothes. Okay, then what happens on another day when there's 10 of those or 100 of those or 3,000 of those? Are you ready to say, we can totally abandon everything else we were chasing, because the need and the interest and the inquiry is so high that all we want to do is feed these poor people, right? That's where suddenly this parable, the question in the parable, will go past a theory to real. Because if in those moments we say, sorry, I'd love to help you all, but I'm busy with my whatever it is for me, then you'll have chosen to not have the treasure in the field. So that's a much more practical sort of rollout. But here's why the question, put the hard way, as they did in the beginning, is valuable to at least think about and pray about. Because as my principal was answering the question, part of it was, are we even willing to let go of all that stuff? And when God decides it's time to ramp up, say, what we call Pentecost or the latter rain, if we're so busy focusing on how to get further in my career and not have learned how to pay attention to the needs of the needy person around, we certainly won't be paying any attention to the needs of the 100 or the 50 or the, so there, it's interesting just to think about that transition. What would really it take to change from what we're focused on now versus the real gospel and what it can do for people? So I like how you were putting that, Amber. Who else worked on Christ object lessons a little bit or got some thoughts on this whole one sentence power packed parable?
What about the what if you just added something to the parable? What if someone came to this man and said, hey, you see that dirty patch of ground over there? I promise, if you sell everything you have and go and dig over there, you're going to get the best treasure ever. how effective would that be?
Depends on how much I trust that person.
Okay, that's an element. So what if it's somebody you just met? Seems like a nice enough guy.
Probably not.
Okay, good. It's
Yeah, 'cause
interesting that the guy finds it by himself, right? He's the one doing the digging. He's the one, doing the tilling, and he's the one who runs into the treasure. He's also the one who, after looking at it, comes to the conclusion that it is of that much value. So.
Yeah, because wouldn't it actually be the presumption connection again, because we've used that word already, to just go on what somebody said?
Yeah.
Somebody said there was a treasure in the field. That's not a good thing to go on until you see its value for yourself. You would never be motivated to do.
That's why I liked Ellen White's writings about it being the scripture. And this person was definitely, since he was doing the field, he was reading scripture.
Right.
And all of a sudden he came upon, wait a minute, I've discovered gold here, the gospel. So that to me is more powerful than someone telling me, oh, there's something over there.
Yep. Yeah, it requires that you taste it for yourself, that you see it. I mean, that's what you're pointing out, John, right? Is that this effect can't really happen until you find the treasure yourself.
Yeah, I feel like something has to happen, right? Like scripture says that he was like a root out of dry ground. I mean, to the worldly mind, Christ was not very attractive or valuable at all. In fact, it was pretty easy for him to make fun of him. And I'm remembering another parable we just read where she started out describing that these men were standing around and they were looking at all the rabble that Christ was attracting, and they thought, how could the kingdom of heaven be made up of this?
Yeah,
right? So they were struggling with the opposite conclusion, which is there's nothing of value here at all.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I think they saw gold in the midst of dirty. I think that they saw and recognized, I mean, truly, if they knew their history, which the Jews did, surely plenty others didn't, but there was enough people that knew the history to go, this is this is following all of what we should be looking for. But look what he's surrounded by. Is it worth it? Are we really being called to give up all that we have for this?
So you're thinking they were under conviction, but then having the same struggle that Judas did.
They couldn't give it up. They couldn't give up everything that they owned, because their traditions were worth more than what they were seeing, or what they were seeing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the quote you were referring to, John, was really talking about the leadership, kind of the Pharisees, right? And them looking and going, wait a minute, you're going to let all these people in the kingdom? Something's wrong with that theory. Because it's supposed to be only us special ones.
Right.
Which is surprising because they've been working that field.
Yeah. They've been plowing that field till they were sick and tired of the fields. But they never found the treasure. Yeah, so obviously the deep center connection, I've been sort of working around the outskirts, but yes, the big center connection is that treasure is the gospel. And I just know this from experience in my own brain, in my own heart, that the more that we learn about how amazing and wonderful God is, the more valuable he becomes. Not that his value is changing, but it changes in our estimation. And as that value goes up, and then we look around and we make the connection that here's somebody that is needing it, it can only be in sync with the gospel to sacrifice whatever, like the rich young ruler connection, whatever we might have to be able to aid and assist and help those people. That's what the gospel does. But the treasure itself isn't the activity of selling everything you have. The gospel itself is the knowledge of the true and living God, what he's like, who he is.
It's interesting that when he finds the treasure in that field, that he hides it back in the field.
Mm-hmm.
We would probably find the treasure in the field. We might scoop it up and hike out of town.
That's what I said.
Oh, did you? You were in tune then.
Yeah, why bother buying the field if you could just take the treasure and go?
Yeah, you find a keeper.
Then again, if it was that amount of treasure, you'd be taking cartfuls out. Someone might see you and you might be put in jail instead. So I don't know. Maybe that's why he was honest about it.
Well,
Yeah.
and maybe there's more treasure to be had. He just, by owning the field, then it's his.
It does. He goes through the whole field, which always boggled my mind. Like he was the one that reburied it. Did he not know where in the field that he buried it?
Well, yeah, or maybe that wasn't the owner anymore. Maybe it switched hands a few times. But nonetheless, all of those things, we actually like the versions of any other version of the parable more, because then we can avoid the, oh wait, but I've actually got to give up something. Whereas the way the parable is sitting here is, yeah, it's all about, this is so exciting that I am willing to give up anything and everything to have it and to be able to give it to others.
So I'm working on how to not feel condemned in this whole process, because I do recognize in my heart that sounds like an impossible task. It creates fear, right? That's probably the number one thing it creates.
What my mind keeps going to is, because I think it would be a beautiful thing to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean I want to pull my own teeth and force myself to do it. I feel like God convicts as you see that treasure more and more clearly. He'll crowd out the other things that, like, it will be more natural and more spontaneous and something you want to do in the long run. It won't be like I have to make myself do this, because that sounds like righteousness by works right there.
Yeah.
Which was last week's parable, right? The parable was clearly, last week's reading that we did, was clearly about, this is not about will worship or forcing yourself to do. So then this parable switches tactics a little bit from the clear righteousness through grace angle, and simply lays for us the question and the challenge, not so we can then switch back into will worship or righteousness by works, but so that we can evaluate and go, so wait a minute, do I even understand the value enough yet? And it does evoke a little bit of the panic or fear that, John, I want you to explain that a little bit more, John. But ultimately the solution, you're right, Barb, will not be, okay, so then let's switch back to will worship to make myself love the gospel more, or give up more, or help more. You know, it can never go back to that formula. That would be.
Yeah. Could I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Frank.
So I agree a lot with what John's saying, because it is a struggle. And that's why, at first I was like, why is Bobby talking about monetary stuff in the beginning? Why is he talking about, does it have to be, how much more? And then you start realizing, okay, yeah, I do have to give up everything. And
Yeah.
so that's the struggle. I see where John's coming from.
What if we
And-
change the phrasing, Frank, from have to need to? And maybe even trusting that God will make me want to.
Well, I go even further, saying that realizing that his treasure is so much better than what I even have.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
And then, so the desire is for his treasure and not mine.
I think that's what
Well,
Barbara's saying.
and you know, like Bobby, you've talked about drinking in, and you know, by beholding and stuff, and you know that old hymn says, "And the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his," I think it's glorious face or
glory and grace.
But you know, I mean, I don't think it is a lot of work. Like it's actually something that grows into that. Maybe. I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right, Chris. If you think about how much less work it would have been to, in context of return on investment, just again using money terminology, to sell what he had and get this field that then had so much more than it would have been to try to, you know, work his way up to that level. So again, if I just use a money figure, let's say it was $10 million in the hole, meaning in the hole in the ground. And the poor guy, maybe his income is, you know, 20,000, 25,000 a year. Well, how you get from 25,000 a year, eking out an existence year after year, how much less work to sell all that and then get this field that now you're a 10 millionaire, right? I mean, again, it's not really about money, but God is using the parable for our brains to just work on evaluating, like you know, right, that it does say that those who do the work of the gospel shall be sustained by the gospel. Now, what that means is that Peter, James, and John were called to put down their fishing for fish and full-time fish for men. And we can add in all the stuff about, you know, were they any good at it? No. Did they need to be trained? Yes. Were they ready to start on day one and be effective? No. They had a lot to learn and go through, but we're talking about jumping from the beginning of the story to the end where they did have the gospel and it was clear and they did have now given up everything. The promise is that what you need in life, food, clothes, a place to sleep, it will be provided for you. The succession of the 3,000 in a day, Ellen White goes on to explain to ministers that those who are supported by the gospel, you never have to fear because it's not going to run out. Meaning you're going to share with two people and they're going to assist you. And then they're going to want to do what you do, which is now they want to give everything and preach the gospel too. And our first reaction might be, well, wait a minute, but if they're supporting me financially and then they quit working, who's going to provide for me financially? I mean, that's a formula that happens that causes us to have to do things like build a system for tithes and offerings and get actual paychecks to do the work of the gospel. Versus what Jesus said, which was, don't take any extra money, don't take any extra clothes, don't take any extra walking stick, just go. And the disciples had to be going, what, just go. How are we going to eat? Where are we going to sleep? How are we going to have it, what we need for life? So I think it's exciting that the gospel in the gospel itself, already promises, yes, we'll add when you're called, when it's time, when you're trained, when whatever, and you're moved to sacrifice between making for me versus serving those around me who are hurting. If you sacrifice and give to them, God promises that your needs will be provided through the gospel, through the work of the gospel. And that's not a formula we like to teach, particularly at church, because we've got a different system. We've got a system that's set up where you give us all the money, and then we'll decide who gets to teach and preach, and we'll tell them and send them out, and then you don't have to worry about it. You can just keep working. And so we've been trained that most of us, our main function is to keep working and make money. But This clearly at some point in the future goes back to Pentecost, 3,000 in a day, the preaching of the gospel, and it's going to have that effect because, again, when I look around and I listen to people talk and I get on like the call I was telling you about with my friend from years ago, the other night on the phone, and I hear those hurts, those fears, those pains, those sufferings out there. When you start presenting to them or giving to them the real gospel, the excitement will go up. It will be headed for like 3,000 in a day. And at that point, we'll have those of us who are going to be sort of helping with that, meaning delivering of that gospel, will have to have already worked through this stuff. And no longer can it be about, well, wait a minute, don't I have to keep working or do I have to keep working? Those questions have to be done and gone. And
It'll
it
be a
needs to
no-brainer.
That's right. It'll be the no-brainer. That's what I heard Chris say. I just wanted to fill that out, what that looks like. So I think you're right, Chris, that it is like that hymn. It will grow strangely dim and it will get clearer and clearer, especially as the needs around us get clearer in contrast or comparison to the gospel. And I think it should hit every fear we've got, John and Frank. It should really, this parable is meant to challenge us with, wait a minute, give up everything to get that field, to get that treasure. And this is just talking about to get it, not let alone what happens after you get it. So anyway, it's a tough challenge in the parable.
Not just to get it, but he wanted to sell everything he had. And that's why I think the gospel will hopefully change our hearts, that's the things we have won't be worth what Christ can give.
Yeah, so in the beginning, Frank, when I was talking about actual money, what I really was looking for was us not getting a bigger and bigger value on what we have, but a smaller and smaller value. Like, if we could actually admit that, well, what I really have is not even worth, even though it cost me a bunch, it's not really worth $100 in comparison to what's in that field. That's really where it should go, right?
They're just things.
They're just things.
I think Amber is going to experience this to its full measure when her kids come college age. And the kids, when they go college age, they'll tell her, Mom, God's called me out of college.
If that happens, I would consider myself blessed.
What?
She's already ready for that one.
Bobby, I wanted to say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
My version in the Bible says that this man joyfully gave up everything to go get that treasure. And I think that's the bottom line of it. We have to be willing to give it all up joyfully. No fears, no doubts, trusting God. And I love that word, joyfully. He gave it up. Joyfully, he went and got it. And to me, it was just put a different kind of turn to it a little bit.
Yeah, that's very good, because that expresses that the man's what he saw as value in what he found in the field, right? Because the joyfully had to do with how this was going to change his life. And if we think about it, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was just going to say, if it was that he had to, which, I mean, just the word have to kind of suddenly makes it not joyful to me, but if whatever it was so good that it was joyful, it just was what he was like, this is a great deal,
Yeah. So he saw value. It's the value in what he found that created that effect. Now, you might say, well, okay, so how come I've been hearing this character God and it hasn't had that effect on me yet? that's a perfect thing to admit, perfect thing to maybe question and evaluate, because the solution to that, again, is not will worship. It's, Lord, I just want you to help me see the value go up so high that it does create that, what Mom just pointed out about the joyful, right? The joyful to do anything and everything we can to help others, even when it means sacrificing anything that we have. That's really the solution. The solution, again, is to go to God and say, do that in me, so that my fear that John was talking about doesn't stop me, doesn't get us to slam the brakes on. God can fix that. He can change that. He can create in us such excitement for having it and sharing it that nothing else matters. And that's the way the latter rain is going to begin, is that right there, to evaluate this question and go, Lord, I need you to fix my eyes so I can see the value, if that's where we're stuck. The reason my principal cried, I talked to him a few years later about it, is because he said, I know that that's what we were supposed to be accomplishing, and we never figured out how to accomplish it. That was a tough admission, to say that my whole career we were supposed to accomplish something and we never figured out how to accomplish it.
Oh man, I could tell him exactly what they did wrong. They tried to do it standing in front of a chalkboard or from behind a pulpit, and that will never work.
But the question is, do we know how to do it right?
I don't know.
It seems like, God is always just trying to like help us though see how much better that treasure is than even all the stuff. And like, we end up having to pray sometimes for stuff, to like, God, we don't know what's happening, bills, whatever. And it always just ends up, something pops up in some job that comes in and it's just bam, and it takes care of everything. And sometimes Elizabeth and I read these, we're trying to, okay, God, we really got to know what the plan is. What are we doing? Which way? And God is always, it's always to us, it seems so crazy, the things that he asks. It's like, we'll open the Bible 10 times and every single verse, we're like, God, what are we supposed to do? And the only thing we find is verse after verse after verse about singing. And so we're like, I guess we're just supposed to sing. And so we start singing praise songs, at first it's just kind of like, geez, this is crazy, but whatever. And you know what? It's really, it makes you happy though, and start trusting. And then, like other times it's, God, what are we supposed to do? Okay. I guess before that it was be still and know that I'm God. And I'm like, okay, I'm sitting in my yard being still. And actually all the bills still got paid. And I was like, what the heck? And, and so I think he's trying to, always trying to show us that the things of earth, and I'm not ready to just give up everything. I don't feel for sure like either, but it is like he's always helping that faith in that treasure of him grow, so at some point maybe, we, I guess, will be able to, or ready, or and so far it hasn't felt like a big bunch of work, but
no. And here's the bottom line, Frank, that really what this treasure is about is causing you and I to be so filled with Jesus-like love that it becomes natural for us to do laying down of whatever of our life we have or can or need to, when it comes to helping somebody else, to loving somebody else. That's the bottom line. It has to be about learning to love the way Jesus loved, who set the pattern of leaving all the riches and wealth behind and coming down and dwelling among us, and took a beating from us just to deliver to us how much he and his father loved us. That's, no matter where we go, when we get to the end, that's the bottom line. That's what put
That's-
in us. will
Even
do it.
even to those who hate us.
That's right. That's what'll do it. It's not formulas about, really, like Amber said, should I go to work today or not? Sure, you can pray about it. But ultimately, that's not really the most deep question.
That's
And
because
that parable flipped like that, in that Christ saw us, humanity, as the treasure in the field
Yeah.
and gave all. That's
Yeah.
that's a cool thought too. I'd never thought that.
he had love. He is love. It's interesting in 1 Corinthians 13. Yeah, the love chapter. it even, Paul even adds a bunch of stuff in here that you would think, those are the keys. If I had all faith, so much so that I could move mountains, he says, or even if I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and even if I gave my body to be burned, if I martyred myself. What else does he add in here? The ability to speak in tongues, to prophesy,
Yeah.
understand all mysteries, and have all knowledge. I can have all of those things, but if I don't have this one thing, it all means nothing. If I don't have
So,
love.
yeah,
But that goes on with what Amber was saying, because God's character, even though this planet hated him, he still considered it a treasure. That's his love. It's just character. He can't help but come and try to save us.
yeah, because if the treasure is the gospel, then we could ask next, and what's the gospel? The gospel is that he loved, as Amber said, he loved you so much, he laid everything down, let go of everything to come get you. So now that we did all that, you got 10 minutes left. Who's got a modern version of this parable you want to toss out for us? I figured this one should be an easy one. Because it's about money. What do you got, Chris? You got a modern one for us?
Just a second, I walked away. I heard you say, what
I
do
was
you
just
have?
asking, yeah, who's got a modern, you got a modern version of this parable?
Of the treasure in the field?
Yeah.
I guess I could think about it here and try to come up with something.
Well, so if I was telling telling a parable at Chris's house, I would use so there was this business that was for sale, and the business looked like it really wasn't very profitable. It was kind of profitable, and the price tag on that business was $1 million, and it just didn't seem like it was that great of a value. So businessman after businessman looked at it and decided, nah, not really interested in that business. And then one day a man came along and decided to spend time talking to the employees and hearing about their lives and what was going on with them and their jobs and what was working and what wasn't working. And in that process, he was going through a back closet, and he found in that back closet a box that had been forgotten for a long time. And inside of it was $5 million worth of gold. And the question is, a mediocre business for $1 million, is it worth selling everything you have so you can take a bank loan and buy the business for $1 million? I don't know. I was only thinking Chris is always thinking about how to get a better business going. So that would be one. That would be one for you, Chris. Because certainly finding that in the closet would make it worth buying it all. Plus, then he'd have the value of interacting with all these people, the employees. Well, you could use a car, someone, there's something in a car someone's going to buy. It's not that great of a deal of a car. Anything like the field, right? There's lots of things you could use. Question is, so yeah, if I was talking to Darren, it would probably be a truck. Got him into buying and selling trucks.
I feel
Real
like
estate.
what was that?
I said, or real estate or something like that.
Yeah, real estate. Well, the real estate is the field, but you could use a house. It's a little different version of the real estate, right? Bought a house, or a house that doesn't look that valuable. Find in it something really valuable.
I feel like Adventists have been touting this parable in a different way, a slightly different light, since, I mean, that's what I grew up hearing is be ready to walk away from all that you have and run for the hills when the time comes. And as much as I get tired of kind of hearing it that way, there is that truth to it that at some point, that when I first heard that, it sounded really scary to me. And at this point, I welcome it. Like, let's get this over with. Like, I would so rather, have this earth be done. Let's get rid of this place. It's worth it to me to walk away and be done.
So you could build that to match this parable if you explain what was the treasure in the hills.
Right.
You'd have to come up with that piece of the formula, and then you could use that. It'd be fun to hear someone do this in something that's related to actually people or a person, like a child that they ended up selling everything they had to be able to afford to adopt. But something in the scenario where it doesn't look like a very valuable or very nice or very whatever, something's wrong with it, I don't know, but then they see such great value, and I don't know, that might be an interesting twist.
It has to be something to deal with the gospel, because I think that's what Ellen White brings out. Like I said in the beginning when we started discussing, the field up equals scripture, but the treasure is the gospel, and the gospel is other-centeredness, so it has to deal with that. And running away to the hills is not other-centeredness, it's almost selfishness.
Well, but neither is buying a field for a box of gold in it, unless we can identify that the treasure, whatever scenario you build, that piece of treasure, it has to represent the gospel.
Yes.
And of course, it's interesting because Jesus doesn't really even explain that. We get it out of Christ's object lessons, but
right.
If you just heard Jesus that day, what would they get out of it? I think the only thing they could get out of it was whatever it is, whatever the treasure is, apparently you're going to have to be willing to give up everything to get it. That was the point, the only point that they could really, learn out of this parable without the help of Christ's object lessons.
Well, and the fact that, the questions that I asked, like, why wouldn't he just take the treasure when he saw it instead of buying the field? Or why wouldn't it be better to go to the owner of the field and say, hey, you have this treasure in your field? That would be the more honest thing to do. But the whole point of it was, this is the kingdom of heaven, that it's not these other things. It's that you find something so valuable that you're willing to do this. And if you were to just steal it, well, the gospel isn't something you can steal. You have to be willing to give up all in order to grasp it, to gain it. So I think we can look at how we might do things, but we don't do things the way heaven does. So
and everybody would have related to this parable in the way of, if I found that in the field, that's what I'd do.
Right.
He was using their sort of natural love of finding a treasure to make a parallel to what we're quick to get onto, which is the meaning of it, which is great. That's important. We get the meaning, but I guess as far as when we're talking about the effectiveness of learning to teach in parables, you got to know that it's okay to use. Jesus is doing it right here. He's using what is in their sinful nature, meaning before they're converted, to talk about a connection, to make an emotional connection to an idea. And in this, the idea is that the kingdom of heaven, if you had it, if you knew what it was, if you found it, here's what would happen: is it would be so valuable to you, you'd give everything else up just to get it, right? That's the point he's making. So it's okay to make a parable that's built on their life, their sinful sort of thought process, like in this case, just, don't tell nobody, cover it back up, go get it. But it's to make the point that, yeah, and if you knew how valuable the gospel was, that hopefully is what you do. Give everything up to have it.
I think in their society, they did have to give up everything to be a follower. They were outcast. They were thrown out of the temple. They were everything. So they did give up everything to be a follower of Jesus.
I'd say even in our society, I'd say most people walk a line of both religion and worldliness. You don't see very many people who are straight godly. So even in our time, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're right, Amber. What Mom said is just as much true now, but we keep trying to figure out how to not have to have it be. How to have the treasure and not give up everything we have. Well, good exercise.
I think God will make that decision. I mean, he's kind of the one that will make it happen, right? I mean, one of the things we need to consider is that Jesus is the one that called the disciples. They didn't call Jesus. And so there is just that little piece.
Yeah, and I think what you mean by that, John, is that Jesus is to do the leading, not us.
Right, absolutely. He needs to call, and I think it's fair and right for us to say, Lord, in my own strength and power, is never going to happen because I'm too scared. I'm, too knee deep in this thing or that thing or whatever. But I do know and trust that you, Lord, have the power not only to change my heart, but to prepare it for what is needed, and that I know is coming.
And you're right. And that's exactly the story I was telling with those who were on Thursday night, because for me, that was definitely a call, having been called and saying, no, you know what? I think what I have is still too important. And I chose that instead. So that was me chicken and running scared, just like you're talking about. So that's why I have to be evaluating exactly what I'm talking about today. The reason I'm talking about it is not because I'm trying to chisel away at you guys, but I'm going, yeah, that's exactly my problem. Well, let's have a closing prayer. And then if you guys want to chat some more, go ahead. I got somebody that's supposed to show up here in 2 minutes. I got to just visit with for a few minutes. So I'll hop off and then I'll be back on at 2:30. 2:30, if you want, we can spend some time doing actual reading out of Christ object lessons on this or anything else you guys got. So let's have a
yeah. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I just said, yeah, that's a good idea because I liked the last 3 paragraphs in that. Very good 3 paragraphs.
Well, it's not that long. We can read quite a bit of it there at 2:30.
Oh, no, it's a pretty long chapter.
Yeah. All right, dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love and your grace. We just ask that you'll bless the fact that we're even thinking on these questions. We don't want to create some program that's made from our wisdom or from our either presumptuous decisions or anything like that. But we do want to have the gospel grow in such value to us that it causes the value of those around us to become so much greater than anything that we have or could pursue for ourselves. And in that, we would be learning to become like you and have the heart of the kingdom implanted in us. So we thank you for that. We just ask for your grace and your wisdom. We thank you for the Sabbath, giving us a chance to just pause from all the busy activity and remember what's important. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, you guys can chat a little bit longer. I'll be back this afternoon. Love you guys. Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath. Thanks, Bobby.
Bye.
Happy Sabbath.
You guys, bye.